And we are live. Thank you for joining us this evening. If anybody is joining us, I'm not entirely sure we have an audience yet. So in the meantime, I'll sort of give an introduction. I am on the road this time around, so I'm not at home. I don't have anything resembling a studio. I have a computer and a wall in my office and a whiteboard behind me. I'm an engineer. I live and die by a whiteboard. Rather than go into guns and optics, although as we open up a Q&A, we can address whatever questions you may have as well. My big thing right now is to sort of get an update on what's happening with the Ukraine war. It seems like the war has changed its nature somewhat. I have been following it somewhat leisurely, but Eugene, who's been here with me before to talk about Ukraine, has been following it a little bit more closely. So I'm going to bring him on and pick his brain a little bit. And if you guys have questions, put them in the chat anytime. All right, Mr. Fratkin, good to see you here again.
Thank you.
So, where shall we start? What's a reasonable entry point into the discussion of what's happening in that clusterfuck now?
It's been a little bit of time since we talked last time. Few things happened. Definitely the character of war changed. The places where there is action changed quite a bit. It's not very much recent news, but Russia pulled out of the most of their, I guess, areas around Kiev. They got pushed out of most of the Kharkov area, and they seem to have focused primarily on Lugansk, Donetsk, and a little bit in the area around Kherson. So
let's do this. We talked a little bit behind the scenes about this website called UnderstandingWars. They do really, really good maps. I'm going to pull up one of those maps and put it up on the screen so that people kind of have an idea where you and I know where these places are because we grew up not too far from there. But I don't expect sane people to have the same grasp of Ukrainian geography. So let's see. Here we go. Yeah. So if you guys haven't seen this website, it's called UnderstandingWars. It's a bunch of pretty intelligent people who sort of do this for a living. They give regular updates on just the military aspects of this, of what's happening, and they have a reasonably good grasp of where we are. So tell me, can you see the mouse?
yes.
Excellent. So I'm going to magnify this a little bit. And what Eugene was talking about, so this is essentially the border between Russia and Ukraine. So this is what we're talking about, eastern Ukraine. Kharkiv is one of the large, Kharkiv is the second or third largest city in Ukraine. Second largest after Kiev. So Kiev is a little bit further west and close to Belarus. Belarus is up there. So Kharkiv is back in Ukrainian hands. There was another offensive on the side of Sumy. That seems to have gone back to Ukrainian hands. And everything that is surrounded by red lines is where the entertaining stuff is happening in a few cities, Lugansk and Donetsk. These were the regional breakaway areas. And anything that's not this kind of a diagonal cross lines is where are the areas that Russians have captured during this latest adventures. So the Lugansk and Donetsk separatist areas were, well, they claimed they're independent. They were really controlled by Russia. And down here, also with this kind of diagonal lines, is Crimean Peninsula. That is, yeah, right there. That was also controlled by Russia since what, 2014?
Yep.
Yeah, 2014. So that should give you an idea. Eugene, if that helps, I can keep the map up and you can
yeah, if you can zoom in a little bit. So
okay.
the legend on this map is the pink areas, the newly captured territories. Orange areas, and you see a few pieces of this, is new Russian claimed controlled territories. And the blue areas are results of Ukrainian counteroffensive. So those used to be controlled by by Russian forces, and now they're controlled by Ukrainian forces. The area around Melitopol, this is the one with a blue stripe. Yes. Yeah, this stripe generally means partisan activity.
Okay.
In notation. So yeah, so as you can tell, we had Kiev was almost surrounded in the very early stages of the war, and there were Russian forces going down from Belarus to Kiev. That's completely free. With caveats, I'll mention in a second. Sumy was nearly captured. It was fully surrounded. It's completely free. Kharkov was almost surrounded. It's right now completely free, and Kharkov proper is not within artillery range of Russian forces anymore. The caveats is there's still quite a bit of rocket fire, including on Monday, a large number of Ukrainian forces were killed in barracks around Kiev. So just because they're not in immediate vicinity of Russian forces does not mean they're out of harm's ways. Largely, Russians' tactics changed quite a bit. So initially, this was fast-moving aerosol teams with long columns running out of gas. This was amazing environment for javelins and small arms, sniper fire, and so on. Now it changed to more of a meticulous artillery-based fire on both sides. So there are extensive, very heavy artillery battles taking place across most of those front lines, with typically drones used as forward observers. So there are many drones on both sides. Russia has more or less uncontested control of the air, at least in the territories near the Russian control areas, which makes it very difficult for Ukrainians to mount significant counteroffensive, because at this point, again, all of the really, really silly tactics. Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Oh, there we go.
Am I back?
Yeah. I don't know what happened.
All right. I'm not sure when I dropped off.
You just started talking about the war changing. Jason, you're very welcome. Thank you for chiming in. You started talking about the war changing artillery battles. Russia has uncontrolled. Russia has complete control of the airspace over the captured territories, which makes life difficult for the Ukrainians. I gotta say, Ukrainians could have used a few MLRSs. It could have resolved most artillery battles fairly quickly.
That's right. So at this point, a lack of heavy weaponry makes it very difficult both to defend as well as to advance. By and large, Russian forces were able to establish defensive positions. So at this point, recapturing does mean going against prepared defenses. And this does require artillery, does require some heavy weaponry. Drones, Russia is leveraging drones very effectively. Ukrainians do not have quite as many sophisticated drones, so their radio is being intercepted by Russian signal forces. So despite the fact that seemingly there are no crazy breakthroughs on the Russian side, the fighting is extremely heavy. So this is kind of illusion that this map gives, that almost nothing is happening, that basically situation settled. That's actually very much not the case. There is extremely heavy fighting in several areas. So Russia is trying to advance from, so if you can point out where Izum is, which is that.
Is Izum on the map or not?
Yeah, it is on the map. It's if you see this piece that half kind of like possibly could be encircled, right? So Izum, no, a little bit further to the west. Yeah, a little bit further more. So yeah, right.
This area? Okay.
Yeah. So right above that is Izium, which is one of the cities that Russia has captured. And they were trying to advance south from Izium to encircle Ukrainian forces. Fighting is still extremely heavy there.
So the implication is that Ukrainian forces are out here somewhere, and Russia's trying to do this kotyol cauldron type thing from
Yep.
here to encircle them.
Correct. This is obviously this is a significant portion of Ukrainian forces holding off Russians here. So it's not a small number of units concentrated on both sides here. Ukrainian forces try to. So what's not on this map and what's very critical to understand, there is not a lot of roads in Russia. So most of supplies are supplied by railroads or very few paved roads. So one of the main supply routes is just east from Kiev. So you see this blue area that were just recently captured by Ukrainian forces directly east from Kiev. The main objective of this offensive is cut off Izium's main supply line. This is sorry, not from Kiev, from Kharkov. I misspoke.
Kharkov, okay, got it.
If you go east from Kharkov, see this blue area, like directly east.
Yeah.
One of the towns here is a major resupply route. Ukraine so far was unable to reach that resupply route because Russia understood the nature of their offensive. If they would cut off Izium regimental tactical groups, then Russia would not be able to try to advance from Izium area. So circles indicate heavy fighting as of today, I assume. So the Russia gave up on this larger cauldron, and they focused on much smaller one, where kind of 4 out of the 5 circles are. And
so this general area.
Yeah, and again, they had some tactical success. They captured a couple of the villages, which is a commanding height, something like 350 meters, 1,000 feet. It doesn't sound like a lot, but given that it's mainly steppe.
Yeah, it's all flats. I mean, I live in Albuquerque. For us, 1,000 foot is just a morning walk.
Correct.
Right.
So unfortunately, that height allows Russians to control the supply route for Ukrainian defense forces. So that puts Ukrainian forces in a difficult situation. So again, like despite the fact that there's not a lot of movement on the map, the situation is very dire on Ukrainian side. I mean, it's probably not fantastic on Russian side, but I'm probably less sympathetic to their problems.
Oh, shame on you. Okay, so a couple of things that. So I'll move the map off the screen if you need it. I'll open it back up. So a couple of things that you said earlier. You said that Russians were able to establish some sort of defensive positions in eastern Ukraine, and Ukraine is going up against that, which is really not so straightforward. Is that an indication that they are sort of settling in and are planning to just bite off that part of the Ukraine and leave it alone, or do you think they still have ambitions of grabbing more territory, moving further south? I mean, we talked a little bit about eastern Ukraine. We didn't talk about Mariupol. We didn't talk about Odessa. What does it look like?
So the best guess, and obviously I'm sure Russia will change its objective as reality changes on the ground. The best guess is they're trying to push to the district boundary of Lugansk. So what they controlled prior to February 24th was a fairly small, about 1/3 region of Lugansk, and similarly small part of Donetsk. It's unlikely that they will be able to capture the entire Donetsk region, but they are trying to push to Lugansk district boundary. The other district that's under their control is Kherson district, which both includes a path to Crimea, land path to Crimea, as well as areas a little bit past the where Crimean Peninsula attaches to main Ukraine.
Okay, let's get that map back up on the screen, just so that it is all clear. Okay, and let's move them down. There we go.
So, what most people assume would be the case if nothing changes on the ground is that Russia will proclaim control over Kherson, Donetsk, Lugansk, either as autonomous territories or directly as a part of Russia. And probably at this point, it doesn't look like they have forces to move further. Now, Odessa is still free. It's being periodically shelled. But so far, there have not been an attempt to have a naval assault or any significant push towards Odessa. So, in terms of land movement towards Odessa, there is very slim chance that they could close this ground. Right now, they've been having big breakthrough on the front is moving 10 kilometers. This is usually movements are kind of between 4 and 5 kilometers per day in one or the other direction.
Mm-hmm. So we're basically moving a couple of kilometers here and there.
Yes, again, like not to diminish human losses that associated with this movement. Think of like World War I, where you could easily lose 100,000 troops trying to move kilometers.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That's interesting. I'm writing an article right now about some old rifles for Guns and Ammo. So one of the things that I ran into, why do old guns look the way they do? Well, they were designed during the days of the trench warfare in World War One. That's why everybody was basically sitting in a trench, occasionally sticking their head out, right, and getting it shot at. Then at some point there'll be a whistle, and small groups of 10,000 people will get up, run 20 feet forward. Half of them get shot. The other half dig another trench and sit in that trench, 20 feet forward for another 2 months. So we're sort of in a modern version of that, except with cannons and motorized vehicles.
Yeah, so right now, majority of the casualties is by far is indirect fire, something like 93%. So artillery by far is the biggest part of indirect fire. Drones are kind of cute if you're hunting an Al-Qaeda leader. Rockets are okay for occasional high-value target, but ultimately, kind of dumb shells is.
They're cheaper, and there's a lot of them.
That's right. Yeah.
Interesting. So is motor? When you talk artillery, are you talking about motorized artillery or stationary positions?
So all of them are fairly mobile because, again, there is this, I don't know if you call it chess game, but there is a maneuver game where goal is to get your artillery in a position to reach what you know is the enemy encampment. And once you fire off, you move before their artillery maneuvers in the position to cover you. So there is quite a bit of artillery movement. Ukraine does not have a lot of self-propelled artillery. Russia has both.
Okay. Interesting. Really, really interesting. Okay, so Ukrainians and Russians are maneuvering around eastern Ukraine, taking pot shots at each other. What's next?
Well, it's a good question. Depends on who you ask. So discussion of coups in Russia, so on, I just discount those because it's one of those events that if it happens, it happens. You will never read about it in New York Times 3 days before.
Yep.
So it's impossible to plan. It's not a strategy to wait for that. There is no reason to assume this is inevitable by a long shot. So kind of I view it as possible but very low probability outcome. Most likely, Russia sooner or later, and I would give it about 2 months, will run out of steam to the point where they will want to have some kind of cessation of heavy hostilities.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Ukraine is more or less the same state. They have a lot of humans who are willing to fight, but they do not have weapons.
Well, what about all this Western support? I've been hearing about that. We are sending them stuff. Europe is sending them stuff. What are we sending them? Wiffle bats, or I mean?
Right. So out of my house in California, I probably can see a couple Ukrainian flags. Unfortunately, this does not help fight the war in Ukraine. So in terms of actual supply, the only thing that we definitely supplied in quantities were javelins.
Okay.
Javelins are not offensive weapons, right? Those were great.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair.
Right. The rest of the supplies, and again, it depends what do you attribute it to. Basically, they do not exist. So there was 18 howitzers that were supplied to Ukraine about month ago, which yes, they're being used, and there are shells that were supplied as well. There is additional 90 howitzers that we supplied maybe a couple of weeks ago.
90 is in 90, 19.
90.
Okay.
My understanding is those are generally not in a great working order, so they require quite a bit of refurbishment before they could be put to use. Which was, again, it was not accidental. They were not our primary howitzers ready for battle. They were deep storage older version A1s.
Okay.
National Guard promised to send 200 M113s. So probably everybody listening here knows M113 is not our cutting edge battle vehicle. We still used it a little bit as ambulances to bring water in low intensity combat areas. But generally, those are pretty obsolete vehicles. Plus, I'm not sure the 200 that were sent, if those are the A3 versions fully upgraded or some of the older versions in more complicated condition.
That's what Jason is saying, that we send M113s as well.
That's the M113s I'm talking about, except they didn't arrive yet. We promised.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we promised 200 M113s. They're in the mail. There is 2 Mi helicopters, old Russian helicopters that were meant to be sent to Afghanistan, but because we moved out of Afghanistan, there was nowhere to send them, so we sent those to Ukraine. Those are not attack helicopters.
That's actually a good point. We gave the Taliban modern American helicopters. Don't need to give them old Russian ones.
Right. Yeah. So from US, that's about it. Denmark gave 1 armored vehicle based on M113. And then there were a few promises of anti-naval missiles. I think that's about it as far as heavy machinery at the moment.
Interesting.
Sorry, in Germany promised a few Gepards, but again, still in the mail.
Interesting. So, I mean, what does it mean, right? Is the implication here that it's all words, or is the implication here that we feel very badly for Ukraine as long as we don't have to do anything, or are we seeing when it push comes to shove, all the support Ukrainians get is pretty words? Because there's a lot of pretty words. Politicians go to Kiev, do photo ops, the usual stuff, right? Is that all it is amounting to, or what?
Well, definitely my interpretation of this one comes to military help. So according to timeline, Biden administration was sure about the Russian intent to attack 6.5 months, which would give them ample time for planning just in case. War has been raging for 3 months now, which is not a short period of time, and even modular 40 billion lend lease, which we should talk about separately, president can do quite a bit just using executive power in terms of some supply shipment. Now, there is some people may raise reasonable concerns in terms of cutting edge technology, and if it falls into Russian hands. This is not what we're talking about, right? We're talking about basic cannons, some older, in some cases 60 years old, armored vehicles and so on. So there is no reason why those could have not been shipped faster. I would even make an argument that concern about the IP falling into Russian hands is overblown. I think that Russia has access to IP that they want to. So I definitely read it as very much lack of desire to help. U.S. popular support very much on the Ukrainian side, so it's very difficult to make a statement against assisting Ukraine. But I think when it comes to actual action, so far we haven't seen much. Unfortunately for Ukraine, it's also not super. I should say, it's not a good game plan to be very vocal about lack of support from US, because if anything they want to boast to Russia
Correct.
about getting those, and they do not want to ruin relationship with US, because if they ruin that, then where would anything possibly come from?
That's an interesting point. So Jason is saying that special forces. I think we're reopening the U.S. embassy in Ukraine, right?
Correct. They
Okay.
said that special forces may play a part in guarding the embassy. Again, like I'm not sure how it changes the state of the conflict, but okay. So instead of Marines, we're going to have special forces. Great.
Are they going to be just guarding the embassy, or will they head to Kiev by way of Kharkov or something?
Okay, so I'm pretty sure that they will only be guarding the embassy. If they were planning to participate in kind of more significant capacity, I don't think we would need to announce those plans publicly.
That's a fair point. So it sounds like your estimation is that all these entertainment with artillery is going to last for a couple more months, at which point everybody's going to run out of resources and negotiations are going to start.
Right. So just to be clear, so we did approve 40 billion lend lease, out of which 20 billion, I believe, is military aid to Ukraine. And my expectation is all of the non-working equipment that the United States otherwise would be throwing away is going to be sold at premium to the State Department, and this is going to be counted as part of lend lease. So I'm expecting we're going to get a lot of new equipment in U.S. military as a result of that.
As a guy who sells stuff to military, I'm very much for that. Now, so 20 million is military, 20 billion is military aid. What's the other 20 billion?
There is economic aid to Ukraine. There is military aid to NATO members in Europe. And then there is surprisingly a bill to simplify legalization status for illegal immigrants.
That's part of the 40 billion package?
Yes.
How interesting. So illegal immigrants to United States or to Ukraine?
To United States.
Uh-huh. Am I the only one sensing a non sequitur here, or am I just misunderstanding this a little bit?
Well, as any broad initiative, I'm sure there were many people who wanted to add more stuff to it. This is the stuff that made it in.
Oh, goody. Okay. So we're not doing shit for Ukraine, but we're legalizing illegal immigrants. Okay. All right. I think I got the gist of it.
Yeah. Kind of unfortunately, my expectation, which I would not mind being proven wrong, is that the West in general is waiting for this time when both sides will run out of steam. At this point, Russia will honestly engage in ceasefire negotiations while controlling Ukrainian territory. The West, Ukraine, as Zelensky already mentioned, they will not initially cooperate, and the West most likely will twist their arm, saying that if you guys want to continue fighting, this is completely on you. We're negotiating peace here. Which puts Ukraine in a rather difficult situation. So Russia is a much larger country. They're getting a lot of money still from oil and gas. And if sanctions get lifted, there will be, in fact, Russia running record surplus at the moment. If sanctions lifted even more, then Russia definitely has much greater capability to make money, build more weaponry. So I expect that this is essentially going to be a 5-year ceasefire, after which Russia will incorporate learnings and will go into a new offensive.
You may be right. I'm a little bit skeptical about Russia incorporating what they learned because, we thought they learned a lot from the adventures in Georgia, and then they go into Ukraine, and perhaps not so much. But
well, they learned during the war in Ukraine. So it
Yeah.
is the stupid tactics that we saw in the first weeks. They're no longer repeated. Now, there are a few things where kind of one of the shining examples is their attempt to cross a river, where they lost 1.5 battalion group. So yes, there are still tactical mistakes, but definitely not as common as they were initially.
Okay. So either they're learning or all the stupid ones are getting killed.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, can we recount the terms that both parts brought for ceasefire negotiations? I don't think there are any negotiations in earnest happening now. So I don't think there is anything to really recount. Eugene is saying within a couple of months, there'll be some fairly serious negotiations, and Ukraine is going to be basically between a rock and a hard place because they will be getting pressured by the West to turn over essentially Eastern Ukraine to Russia, because nobody seems to be especially motivated in beating Russia back. Now
Uh,
that yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Ukraine did state that obviously they don't recognize any territories captured by Russia, and their precondition would be Russia retreating to pre-February line.
Well, but for as long as Putin is alive, I don't think Russia can go for that. I mean, that's such a major loss of face that they can't offer that to their own people.
I think they can in the face of imminent defeat. Unfortunately, again, lacking Western support, I do not think imminent defeat is as likely. So as a result, yeah, I'm pretty skeptical.
Okay. So Western support is when I think about other European countries, at least the only one I can think of right offhand that is very very motivated to help Ukraine, it's got to be Poland, right?
Yes, so Poland, Baltic countries, I think there are generally a few more former Warsaw Bloc countries
Mm-hmm.
that Russia views as friendly, the most active supporters of Ukraine. Yeah,
Well, because they're close enough to Russia to be genuinely concerned, right?
right. So Poland literally views itself in Russian sides. So do
And
Baltic.
you are frozen again. You there?
Yes, can you hear me?
What's okay, Eugene? What's wrong with this piece of? You there? Okay, you're back.
I'm back. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know
Uh,
what's happening. It's raining. I'm in Dallas. It's raining very heavily. I wonder if our connection is not great. So we start talking about Poland and the Baltic republics. I
right.
mean, they're
So basically,
close to Russia. That they should be genuinely concerned.
right. So every country that borders Russia has genuine concern. That includes Finland
Mm-hmm.
uh, and Sweden and everybody, all the Scandinavian countries. A couple of those are applying to NATO, as we know.
Yes. So that's actually an interesting discussion right there. So Finland and Sweden, right? So they're going, okay, it's time for us to join NATO. Turkey basically goes, you have too many. Uh, Turkey basically goes, there's too many terrorists over there. So this. So
That's not going to be a genuine obstacle. I think that Turkey decided to get some concessions about Kurdish independence
mhm.
movements that housed in Scandinavian countries, but I think this is going to be overcome fairly easily.
Okay, so they'll basically just tell Turkey, okay, fine, we don't like Kurds either.
I'm not sure what form it will take, but again, I don't think it will stop Finland from joining NATO because objection is fairly minor from the standpoint of
Okay,
most countries involved.
got it. So to translate the political stuff into human terms, it's not only Ukrainians getting screwed, Kurds are going to get their own too. Okay, got it.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, so since we're both Jewish and we have major world events happening here, how is it going to, how, I'm sure it's in the end, it's going to be turning out our fault somehow. You see that happening? How are we going to pay for this?
Uh, Well, so there was escalation between Russia and Israel in Syria, where Russian forces fired on Israeli jet, which hasn't happened before. There was a Russian foreign minister who claimed that Hitler was Jewish. So,
oh yeah, that was fun. I remember that one. I think Putin spent a fair amount of time apologizing for that one.
We have not sent MLRSs to Ukraine. At least none of the USMLRS is in theater at the moment.
Yeah, I mentioned MLRSs earlier. A lot of all this artillery fund that's happening there could be resolved with a few MLRSs fairly efficiently and quickly.
There is actually, MLRS was specific subject of disagreement between Zelensky and Biden administration.
Really?
2 days ago, Zelensky questioned why US is unwilling to provide MLRSs. Official reason is that US is concerned that Ukraine will target mainland Russia, which makes absolutely no sense because there are chunks of the borders controlled by Ukraine. They could use pistol to fire in Russian territory. Why would they use MLRS for this is unclear.
So Russia in Ukraine shooting up, blowing shit up is okay. Ukraine blowing shit up on the Russian side not okay. Is that the correct interpretation?
Well, it is literally the official position. So concern is that Ukraine will target Russian territory.
I'm beginning to realize why I didn't go into politics, because that makes no sense to me.
I mean, so far, Ukraine also exercised quite a bit of restraint. So there were a few acts of sabotage against the oil staging areas, etc. It's not clear if those were carried out by Ukraine or by sympathizers on the Russian side, but it was about it. There was no artillery fire, there was no direct assault on main Russia. And there are a couple of reasons why this could be the case. Number one, again, like clearly US and few other key Western countries are very much against it. Number two, there is a concern that right now, basically the pretext for war was 100% fabricated, and they want to make sure that there is no legitimate reason to call mobilization and pretend that this is actual offensive against Russia. But also it's possible that it just did not serve strategic needs.
That's possible. So the question is that maybe the M270 is capable of launching short-range ballistic. Okay. Well, that's a little bit of a misnomer. There's no such thing as a short-range ballistic missile.
So the 40 billion nominally includes some Patriot missiles. I'm not sure what's kind of where did the M70 come from. So again, like I'll believe it when they actually appear in Ukraine. So at this point, they exist only on paper. There is no claim that we're shipping those. Patriot, by the way, this has been a very long-standing ask by Ukraine because Russia has, again, basically undisputed control over Ukrainian airspace at the moment.
So fair point. A few Patriot batteries will pretty much take care of that. It's really interesting when I think about it. All the weapon systems we're talking about are old. MLRS is from late 70s, right? I mean, it's been updated here, and the Patriots are from the 80s, right?
Yeah.
Interesting. We should send them some new fun stuff. Right, Mr. Joe goes, I've said Ukraine should have attacked Russia in retaliation to make them secure their border rather than run through Ukraine. No, not really. I don't think Russia cares about their border in the slightest. I don't think that's how Russia thinks. That's how we would think. I don't think that's how Russia thinks.
Again, yeah, I think Russia is willing to take civilian losses, no problem. In fact, this would be the pretext needed for general mobilization. So there were a lot of speculations that Putin will announce general mobilization on May 9th.
Okay.
Most people do not believe it's feasible politically in Russia. Because kind of this war is, while it has popular support, this popular support is conditioned on the fact that you do not need to fight yourself.
Okay.
Significant portion of Russian population would be called up. One, it's not clear they would have anything to arm them with. Number two, this would probably erode significant support. Now, there is a covert mobilization taking place where they're calling up former contract servicemen.
Okay.
And also they kind of offering significant amount of money for very short-term contracts in Ukraine. Now, I found that poster funny, given the casualties they're taking. Short-term contract to Ukraine, meaning probably...
It's not going to last long anyway.
Yeah, so one of my friends joked that's literally «Одна нога здесь, другая там».
Yeah. Yeah. How would you translate into English in a clean way?
It's difficult because it's not a stable expression in English.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Interesting. Jason tells us that the MLRS is being updated. Weapon systems get updated all the time. The things that get updated the most and the fastest are the guiding and targeting modules. As far as blowing shit up, we've known how to do that really well for a long time. But the new targeting modules are indeed quite impressive.
So the reason why MLRSs are interesting is not because they will reach Moscow or anything. They are longer range than artillery. So this allows you to target artillery without it being able to return the fire. Currently, the range of Ukrainian artillery, Russian artillery is pretty comparable. In fact, M777 actually has shorter range, I believe, than Russian 152 millimeter cannons.
That's interesting. Okay, do you know what ERKA is?
No, I do not.
Okay, Jason, I'm not sure what that is. If you don't mind clarifying that, that would be good. Okay, interesting. So the Ukraine war has been going on since what, late February? So March, June, May.
It's exactly 3 months today.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Actually, perfect. Is MLRS over the horizon? Yes, if need be. So what's a nice way of saying this? So I'm not a military guy per se, but I'm sort of work with the techie side of these things. In a networked effort, like we usually do this, almost everything is over the horizon because we have other things seeing and everything is talking to each other. We have a very nice network backbone for most things we do. Ukrainians maybe do, maybe don't. I mean, they have some drones, some ability to do things that's probably limited. So is MLRS over the horizon? It can be. If you want to be accurate over the horizon, you need the rest of what we do. I think that's probably the best way of saying this.
So I'm assuming that canonical definition over the horizon is not literally out of eyesight, but rather it's automatic coordination of fire.
Essentially, yeah.
So even if you have a drone, this would not qualify in my mind as over horizon if you manually need to dial it in.
Correct. No, we do it all. It's all linked together. So
yeah.
Okay, so there's maybe GPS guided or some sort of a guided rockets. MLRS usually not so much. I don't know what the newest one does. We have other missiles that do that. But either way, for what's happening in Ukraine, I think over the horizon like that is not really required. They kind of have a pretty good idea of where to attack and what to shoot. The one of the big things that MLRS does, I mean, it has decent range, but it's the ability to put in a lot of munitions into the area you want comparatively quickly and then move. MLRS can deliver significant munitions faster than you can generally do with the conventional artillery. Oh, there we go. So Jason goes, extended range cannon artillery, 43-mile range, I believe. Yeah, that's given the size of the areas where the fighting is happening. 43 miles, what's about 50 kilometers, is actually fairly decent. Well, no more than 60. Fairly decent range.
So most of the cannons that we supplied, howitzers actually, M777A1, I don't believe they're capable of firing Excalibur, which is
Mhm.
the kind of guided ammunition that has longer range. So I'm not sure what. I'm not an artillery guy, so I'm not sure what falls into this kind of equipment.
Okay.
We supplied few A2s, but
Yeah.
very few.
Well, I mean, if we step back a little bit more to the bird's eye view type of thing, it sure looks like all of the wanted Western support of Ukraine is boiling down to what can we get away with to make our own citizens think that we're supporting Ukraine without putting anything important on the line, essentially.
As you know, this is my interpretation that we're
Yeah, correct.
basically the whole policy consists of pretending to do a lot, but in practice, making sure that this is not a Ukrainian victory, but rather some uneasy ceasefire.
Okay. I will never quite understand the political calculation that gives you what political calculation do you have to make to think that an emboldened Russia with an opportunity to regroup is a good thing?
Uh, it's a trick question because you're assuming there are clear thinking people who have a multi-step policy process. Like our pullout of Afghanistan was that well
Okay,
thought.
that's a little bit of a low blow, but you may have a point. I'm not assuming that we have clear thinking people. I just sort of I'm operating under an assumption that they're not complete imbeciles, and that may be incorrect.
All right, so you're optimistic. And, right, I kind of my view is that basically assumptions let's not rock the boat, and any decisive move in either direction is rocking the boat.
Okay. So Joe says that if you are an arms dealer, well, if you're an arms dealer, that makes no sense. We don't sell guns to Russia. We're not going to sell guns to Russia, right? If you're trying to make money on arms, you want Ukraine to have some sort of an economic output and be an independent country, then you can sell them anything you want. If we were looking for a market where to sell our guns, we want prosperous Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, because after this Russian adventure, we're not going to have a better customer than that. Right?
Yes, if Russia is to buy weapons somewhere, and they do have manufacturing capabilities themselves, it
Yeah,
probably would be China before a US dealer.
correct. Arms isn't just guns. Correct. If we're talking about sophisticated weapon systems, if we are really particular about supporting people who buy them from us, we should be supporting them.
A
So,
couple of things. First of all, Russia is not known as a big purchaser of expensive, sophisticated weapons. They don't last long. So most of their weapons are fairly basic. And two, I would point to China again and say this is the place where they will buy them most likely.
that's fair. And Joe's continuing. The West will rearm after dumping old stuff on Ukraine. Yes, that part we're sort of doing. The part that, like I said, I don't understand is why are we not doing more of it, right? So there is something that yeah, that's actually a good thing. So I'll get back to my point momentarily. So Chen goes, sometimes I feel like others want to use it as an opportunity to test equipment. See, that one I would get, but we're not really doing that. Like, we're not testing any of the new stuff there.
The kind of true. I do wonder about the super new secret drones because no one really asked for them, and somehow those were sent. In a small quantities, not enough to really kind of change the course of the battle. So there, I would actually believe that somebody wanted to see if those will perform against semi-proficient adversary that has signal warfare capabilities and so on.
Okay, that is yeah, that's a fair point.
We
Okay.
really have not experienced drone warfare in a sense Ukraine is experiencing right now, right?
Yeah.
Us having drones chasing Taliban is a completely different world.
Well, it's also different drones, right? So that's sort of that touches a little bit on the things that I do. Um, the The Air Force is phasing out a lot of the stuff they've been doing with large drones, the Reapers and Predators and all that. And the battle that's going right now in the procurement sessions in the Senate and the Congress is the Air Force is trying to say, okay, we don't need all these big drones. Well, Air Force always hated drones; they want pilots, right? And their argument is that, well, for the future wars, when we have a competent adversary, large expensive drone, will get shot down and it's not efficient, and we need a lot of small drones, right? And the people who deal with other parts of the world are basically saying for permissive environments where there's no real, land opposition from surface to air batteries, large drones that's loiter up there for a long time and can carry munitions and other things do really well, and that's what we've been doing in the Middle East all this time. These were the so-called permissive environments. Russia, Ukraine is not. It's becoming an interesting battle. I think both have their place, but it sure looks like the smaller drones, like the stuff from AeroVironment, from In Situ, the Scan Eagles and smaller, is probably what's going to, and in large quantities, is probably what's going to dominate the skies for future conflicts, at least for the next 20, 30 years, I think. But it becomes you're right, we've never really used the small stuff all that much. We've used it a bit in Afghanistan here and there, but not all that much. So how's it looking? Is all that crap working, or am I wasting my time?
In terms of drones, yes, they've been a pretty impressive tool at the moment. And by the way, it's changed quite a bit from the beginning of the war, where kind of they were used here and there to drop a small bomb or something. Right now, they're used more systematically as forward observer, and artillery used as main fire, which is more likely than encountering columns moving through hostile territory without any defense.
How interesting. All right. Well, I hope if nothing else, we're learning something. Maybe Chen is right, and this all becomes a giant test bed. Maybe we'll wait for things to settle down a little bit, and then test some new stuff. Something good's going to come out of it. Sure, Ukrainians are not excited about being a modern military version of a crash test dummy, but
I mean, again, like I would be fine with testing new equipment as long as the old equipment and the right equipment was supplied simultaneously. So
that wouldn't hurt.
I'm not saying that. On that note, we see there was an initiative that came out from Italy, supported by France and Germany, suggesting ceasefire, and kind of there are 4 stages there. Stage 3 is bilateral agreement over disputed territory between Ukraine and Russia. Now, mind you, disputed territory here is territories that Russia captured in the last 3 months. There was no dispute about those territories ever before.
Well, to be fair, Italy is a part of that, right? So, and if there's one thing we know from European history is that taking a military device from Italy may not be the wisest move, historically speaking. So Joe's saying that they tested drones in the George Floyd riots. Huh? Does that ring a bell?
No. I'm not even sure which side we're talking about at the moment.
Yeah, no idea. So Joe, if you have more info on that, please I'll put it in the chat box. So, Eugene, going back to this interesting proposition, it's Italy, Germany, France, and who?
Germany, Italy, France.
Germany, Italy, France. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the good part is that Germany and France agree on something. That's sort of new.
Yes. I guess it's pretty clear that their intent is not to support Ukraine with this proposition. They got fairly strong reaction from Ukraine to this.
Shocking.
At least US and UK currently do say the right thing.
But nobody does anything useful other than, I guess, Poland.
Again, like I mean, I would be happy to see large quantities show up after the land lease, and the probability is not zero. Though I do wonder what precluded US from sending pretty much anything up until now. So when I forgot which country it was, but one of the countries wanted to donate MiGs through Poland, but they wanted this to
Oh, that
happen.
was Poland primarily trying to donate MiGs.
No, I think it was a combination. There weren't just Polish MiGs,
Yeah,
but
there were Polish, Romanian, there was somebody else. Yeah.
right. U.S. and specifically White House shut that down. MLRS is again. This is public conversation between Zelensky and White House, and they're refusing to provide those. So there are some data points that it wasn't just a money issue or time issue.
So for the F-16, so I brought this up, and one of the guys on my locals community argued that the reason why U.S. put a stop on it is that Poland wanted to get an equivalent number of F-16s instead of the MiGs, and that the White House, U.S. thought it was it was not a good deal. Do you know anything about the specifics of that? That like he thought, and the guy who said this, he's sort of on the left, right? So he tends to believe New York Times and Washington Post. I tend to distrust all of them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm right and he's wrong. Do you know
Uh,
anything about those details?
Those were not the official details that initially surfaced. It's possible that something else came to light afterwards. I actually haven't seen them explicitly asking to be compensated one to one. Number two, I'm also not sure, is this the IP concern? Is this the financial concern? What exactly are we talking about?
Yeah, I assumed it was financial. So it's on my list to look into this a little bit because it's an interesting question. I only saw this trade for the F-16 mentioned in, I think, either New York Times or Washington Post. And I assume that they're lying, but it doesn't mean they can't accidentally get something right. So it's somewhere in my list to look into.
Well, I'm
So
assuming
I'll
they're
take care of it.
quoting a source for this, right? So whether
Oh, don't assume that.
or not, but anyways,
Yeah,
it's worth looking into if
yeah.
actually it was mentioned in press. Probably they cite a source.
Okay. I haven't seen a source yet, but I'll look into that. Okay. Also, Joe came back with the Kyle Rittenhouse video. No, it's a different kind of drone. The drones we're talking about is different than what they had flying over the riots, looking down at things.
Uh, yeah, I'm pretty sure that military, as a police, basically uses more or less commercial level
Yeah.
drones versus military drones. So there's different types of equipment. Radio communications need to be significantly upgraded, not to be as easily
The
thrown off.
comms and the cameras have nothing in common.
Yeah.
Just take my word for it.
By the way, the interesting outcome of pervasive drone usage is that movement at night more or less impossible
Yeah.
because they're so easy to spot with thermals.
Yep.
Whereas before, kind of when we were doing it, assumption was that's when you do all of the things.
So that was sort of easily predicted. The first use of night vision, not even thermal night vision technology by the military, was at the end of World War II in the Battle for Okinawa, where US had those first image intensified scopes. They were mounted on little M1 carbines, and you had to have this 20-pound battery carried with you with a cable going to this thing and all that. So the Japanese thought they could move around at night, and US troops shot them. Then once they tallied up the casualties, half of the Japanese casualties in the Battle for Okinawa were due to the Americans using night vision equipment. So the whole business of we own the night started in 1945. It took a few years, a few more generations of things, but so what you're seeing now with the drones and thermals is a basically useful extrapolation of a few guys walking around with 20-pound batteries in 1945. It's kind of a cool thing. Right, Mr. MZH just joined us. is there a consensus of who is ahead? Guessing Russia in the long run has upper hand. So I think the basic consensus comes down to if the West is actually going to support Ukraine, Russia is screwed. And if the West does not support Ukraine with anything more than words, Russia has the upper hand because ultimately it has ultimately it's a large country with more resources. I saw an interesting argument not too long ago talking about why Russia went after Ukraine this time around, etc. And the argument was about the demographics, right? Russia has a decreasing population, right? So they have to add some other Slavic country to basically replenish a little bit number of citizens. Otherwise, they're sort of dying off and will become severely diminished with very, very aging population by within the next 30 years.
I mean, I don't buy it as a credible reason for this offensive. I mean, generally, demographic populations are relevant in the long term, but there are other ways to address it, such as immigration, which don't require losing tens
Yeah,
of.
that's so. The reason why I bring this up, right? I try to follow to some degree, right? I don't have that much time. Various commentators on the left and on the alt-right. Alt-right is really interesting. So, on the mainstream news, it's all pro-Ukraine as far as they're concerned. Every Ukrainian basically has a halo and angel wings and all that. And then the alt-right are convinced that if Hitler was alive, he would have been aghast at Ukrainians being too Nazi even for Nazis. The usual business, and everybody on alt-right is absolutely convinced that Russia is playing 4D chess, looking at it 60 years ahead and planning every move, and it's all going to plan. And any moment now, Ukraine is going to collapse like a house of cards. The truth, honestly, is likely to be, as always, in the middle somewhere. I don't think either side here is playing 4D chess. Shit happens and they adjust. And nobody knows for sure where this is going to go. Everybody's kind of maneuvering. Do you see any bigger plan here, or we're at the point where they're just maneuvering for advantage?
From Russian side or from
Any side?
Okay, look, from Russia, it was a colossal failure. Even if the situation continues in the worst possible way for Ukraine, right? This was still unforced move by Russia that had very significant downsides and, as far as I can tell, no upsides. For Ukraine, the situation is fairly simple. They're defending their independence and their country, so I don't think they have much longer extending objectives than this. This is pretty difficult challenges. In terms of the Italy, France, Germany, I'm pretty sure the dependence on oil is a big factor. Plus, they generally feel very uncomfortable about any military action.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Jen froze again.
Am I still frozen?
Okay, I'm back, and Eugene is back. I see you moving.
Okay, I don't know if I'm frozen or you frozen.
On my screen, it will both go up, and occasionally I get a note that connectivity is not awesome, but that it restores. I suspect that because I'm hosting this thing, I suspect it's on my side, but I could be wrong. Okay, so Joe says we were actually not frozen, so maybe it's something happening with the service. Who the hell knows? But anyhow, so Mr. Second Guess, it seems like someone doesn't want a Ukrainian victory. I don't think anybody other than Poland and Ukraine particularly wants Ukrainian victory. The specific question is that why would the West specifically not want a Ukrainian victory, right? And does that just boil down to oil and gas?
I mean, I think it's part of it. Another part is that Ukrainian victory means some uncertainty in Russia. And kind of given Putin's intentions, I think this is absolutely reasonable not to worry about uncertainty, but worry about war at hand. But somebody may feel differently.
Hmm. Perhaps. Ooh, that's an interesting question. So Chen goes, if China turns around and starts to support Ukraine instead of Russia, would there be much difference on the surface? None whatsoever. Nobody will let China do anything there. And more importantly, China doesn't really have the capability to do anything there. Um, it's another thing that we are all justifiably concerned about China. China is having some serious economic problems right now. And militarily, China is in no position to support a modern war. I think Chinese military capability is grossly overestimated, to be honest with you. Okay. A couple other interesting questions here. So, well, on China, we forced Russia closer to China. No, we didn't. Russia and China grew closer together because they both hate us, but nothing that we do would change them hating us. I think it's a common fallacy.
I guess one question that I did wonder if indeed Ukraine wins and Russia is imminently about to collapse and it's unclear what its political future is, can China afford this? Because it would be losing a major ally. So, right.
Well, yeah, if Russia collapses, China will just take Eastern Russia and that'll become Greater China. For China, this is sort of a win-win, no matter what happens, right? If Russia does well, it's a partner source of oil and gas. If Russia is so weakened it can't defend its borders, China gobbles up in enough territory to get some oil and gas, right?
Well, the loose scenario would be current government in Russia falls and new government is more pro-Western.
I don't think it matters. I don't. Russia. So Russia has nothing other than oil, gas, and a large number of software developers who create viruses. Right. Uh, it's no matter who is in power in Russia, whether it's a current regime or it's some sort of a change, who knows? No matter what happens in Russia, they still have to sell oil and gas, and China is a big enough customer where it doesn't matter. They'll sell it to them anyway. I don't think anything there is going to change.
I'm less concerned about oil sales. I'm more concerned about kind of political, having a sense that there is somebody else who is friendly to the West on the northern border.
Russia is so big. I don't think if somebody's friendly to the West in Moscow, it means nothing for the Siberia.
I mean, I'm not implying that it's going to be imminent
Yeah.
existential threat to China.
Okay, so Mr. MZH goes, then why bomb Iran over Asian airspace with Russian and Chinese aircraft today? I have no idea what he's talking about. You know anything about that?
I have not watched the news today yet, so
All right.
Google.
Sorry, I wish I had an answer for this, buddy, but I have no clue. Mr. Morano goes, where's this conversation about Russian collapse coming from? Just hypotheticals, trying to, the war game, the hypothetical situations. It is possible for Russia to collapse under the strain of this war. I don't think it's hugely likely, but I think it's possible.
I mean, to be clear, there's a lot of unhappy generals in Russia, some under house arrest, some dismissed from their positions. There are significant casualties on the Russian side, which again, and then there's a lot of billionaires who are losing a lot of money, who otherwise were living fairly good life, and it wasn't clear to them that this was a necessity. So it's not completely unclear who could be unhappy about it.
Yeah. That's a fair point. So Joe goes, the West wants Russia tied up in a proxy war. I'm not so sure. So I want Russia tied up in a proxy war, right? So since I don't have any particular warm feelings to either side. Like I said, I'm in this case mostly pro-Ukraine, right? But by and large, I mean, I don't mind if they're tied up in a long, exhausting war that completely exhausts Russia and keeps it preoccupied. I'm totally fine with it. I don't think the West is acting in a way consistent with that. So
being tied up in a proxy war. I mean, this is not what it's looking like. To be
yeah.
clear, proxy war would be kind of continuous active warfare.
Mm-hmm.
There is no way this would continue to be the case. Even if we supply enough weapons to Ukraine, Ukraine has no desire to conquer mainland Russia. They would move to the border and stop. If we don't supply, this is going to become one of those like minimal conflicts that don't really tie anything up.
Mm-hmm.
Similarly, how Russia was on a proxy war. Well, it's not a proxy. I think it's a Russian-initiated war from 2014 until now. It didn't stop Russia from starting a real war.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Okay. Unfortunately, the casualties of this proxy war are the civilians that want to go back to normal life. It don't care what party governs them. I'm not so convinced. I mean, it depends on what you mean by what party governs them. Ukrainians have shown quite convincingly that they don't want to be governed by Russia, I think. So I'm not so convinced that civilians really don't care. They definitely don't want to be in a war, right? So it's easy for me to say, sitting on the other side of the ocean.
So I see this sentiment on a lot of pro-Russian sites.
Yeah.
I do not know where people get this information because Ukrainian military, lacking popular support, would not hold off for, well, literally it would be 2-3 days as Russia planned. The biggest miscalculation was actually the extent of popular support to Ukrainian military. So I don't know, like I don't know if calling it a proxy war reasonable. Definitely, it's offensive to Ukrainians, but I'm not sure there is even the kind of probable cause for this. I do not know if Ilya is frozen or both of us are frozen at the moment. Okay, thank you. So it seems like Ilya lost the connection. So there is a continued question related to sentiments that appear different in eastern parts of the country. I don't see this to be the case. In fact, I would like you to point to a single dominantly Russian city that was unwilling to fight against the Russian forces. Kharkov is 90% Russian, and they put up significant resistance. This resistance was not some Western, the forces from Western Ukraine that came there to fight. This was largely popular. So again, I don't see any reason to think that this was something that different from east to west. In fact, probably this was the biggest miscalculation by Russian forces. They did assume that at least in the Eastern Europe, in Eastern Ukraine, this will be a fairly easy fight. So Ilya just texted me saying that he will join in a second. They had a power outage. So I'm assuming he's going to restore power or connectivity by some means reasonably quickly. So I'm not quite the captain because I do not have control over the comments. Only Ilya does. So he needs to rejoin back. Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you guys hear me? Anyone? Anyone at all? All right,
I can hear you.
excellent. You on the whole time, or did everything die?
No, just you.
Okay. Yeah, so there's thunderstorm here. I saw lightning, heard thunder, and internet died. Internet is not back up. I connected through the hotspot on my cell phone.
Okay, I think we can hear you okay.
Excellent. So, yeah, my question blew the servers out. Not only that, you caused the whole freaking bad weather nexus around Dallas. Shame on you. So what did I miss?
Not much, since I cannot advance the comments and display them. So I touched on sentiment on eastern part of the country, which again, and then there's a follow-up related to Donetsk and Lugansk. Again, like I think there is when FSB agent lands in a territory with a couple dozen friends, I don't consider it a popular sentiment. I consider it astroturfed. So if you can point to more native sentiment, to me, it's not clear that this is the case.
Okay. I will say this. I don't talk to as many people in Ukraine as Eugene does, but everything that I'm getting from people in Ukraine, not from news sources, suggests that they're not itching to be governed by Russia at all. If anything, this whole endeavor has strengthened this Ukrainian sense of their own national identity more so than it probably was beforehand.
So demographically, you do find pro-Russian sentiment among older generation, typically retired people. Otherwise, it's not clear to me that ethnic Russians are very much pro-Russia, whether it's Donetsk, Lugansk, or anywhere. Now, the areas that were captured by Russia for the last 8 years, it becomes a little bit trickier because one, they were fairly close to conflict, even though there were no actual shelling of major cities there.
Okay.
But you know, they were subject to propaganda. It's pretty difficult to conduct unbiased polls in military-controlled regions. I wouldn't be able to say exactly what their loyalties are, and those could be pro-Russian. But again, like even talking about uncaptured parts of Donetsk and Lugansk, I do not see pro-Russian sentiment. So it makes me wonder why would exactly the areas where Russian military stopped be pro-Russian.
Well, I mean, as generally pessimistic as I am about Russian military power at this stage, their ability to drive propaganda efforts has never been in doubt. And honestly, a lot of the commentary I hear from the right, from the alt-right here in the US, is sort of the result of the success of Russian propaganda efforts. It is stunning how many people, otherwise seemingly sane people, are just buying Russian propaganda line, hook, and sinker. I was amazed.
Yep.
I mean, and the crazier the theory, I mean, the more believable. I even heard one. So when there was the shooting in Buffalo, somebody posted a picture of some Ukrainian soldier who looked like the shooter in Buffalo, saying that this was a Ukrainian Nazi diversion in Buffalo. because all Ukrainians are awful Nazis, right? So it's just insane. Okay. So, Mr. MZH, was the Russian narrative of Ukrainian Nazis destruction, or is this a power grab for resources? Secondly, did NATO and the US not act as an aggressor without 2014 CIA-aided color revolution? So, it's a nice way of saying this. So the first part, I don't fully understand what you mean. There's a bunch of Nazis on, so neo-Nazis all over Eastern Europe, Russia, and Ukraine. I'm not sure what to make out of that one. Do you understand what he means by the first one?
Well, I'm assuming that any conversation about Nazis in Ukraine, we're talking about Right Sector and Azov Battalion. And I think we touched on this a little bit. So initially, Ukraine was very much unprepared for Russian aggression in 2014. So people who repelled the attack in Donetsk, Lugansk were not the regular military. Those were volunteers. And if you do a survey of their views, I'm sure they were driven by different types of pro-Ukrainian ideology. Some of them were what you would consider regular patriots. Some of them were more extreme versions of nationalists. So among those, I guarantee you could find people who have Nazi-like ideology. Leader of Azov Battalion came from a right sector, so he would be rightly considered alt-right. But after it was incorporated into the Ukrainian military, all of the initial command was relieved. They were no longer associated with the unit. Unit officially went through denazification. Again, kind of you can make whatever you will of that. That they changed the emblem. They kind of removed a few of the most clearly associated with right sector leaders. Name remained. Do I believe that I would share views of every single person in the regiment? Probably not. I still assume few people could qualify as Nazis. Again, but going from that to kind of some pervasive neo-Nazi movement in Ukraine completely is not borne out by numbers.
Okay, here's clarification. Russia says this is about destroying Ukrainian Nazis. Yeah, that's complete bullshit. That's just a pretext.
I mean, the composition of Azov Battalion is not just Ukrainians. You have people who are Jewish. You have people who are I guess whatever it was before, most of them died in defense of Mariupol. So again, like, do they have people with questionable views? Yes. At which point do we start calling it Nazi regiment or Nazified country?
Okay, so this is actually an interesting argument. They don't consider Stepan Bandera as a national hero. They do, especially in the Western Ukraine. With all the distaste I have for Stepan Bandera, is that a good reason to attack a country? You don't like their national heroes? I mean, what?
Sorry, Stepan Bandera is, again, like, I don't have a lot of sympathy for him as a historical figure. And he is, okay, so first of all, we'll have to distinguish between his personal actions and actions of his group while he was in VIP jail in Germany during most of the World War. So he didn't personally participate in a lot of actions, but his views were definitely questionable. But just to contrast it,
he hated Jews, he hated Russians. In the end, he hated Germans. He really liked Ukrainians. Like I said, I find the guy distasteful. Why?
He mainly hated Polish people, to be clear.
That's true. He really, really hated Poles. That's a good point.
Yeah,
but he hated a lot of people. I mean,
yeah, that's true. But at the same time, again, Russia has no problem with communist symbols, and
communists killed more people than Nazis. That's true.
Yeah. So again, like, do I condone every single person in Ukraine and their views? No. Do I view Ukraine as some hostile Nazi country? Not by a long shot. Not any more than most countries in Eastern Europe.
All right. So let's see what. Okay, so the same, Mr. Morano. Sorry, I'm going a little bit out of order here. So based on my understanding, there's strong support in Donetsk, Lugansk, and they have succeeded to take Mariupol. Yes, they took Mariupol against strong resistance. And I'm not seeing strong support in Donetsk, Lugansk, I'll be honest with you.
So, sorry, are you implying that Mariupol was sympathetic to Russians? Because again,
No, there was Mariupol was fighting tooth and nail.
okay, so Donetsk and Lugansk had uh, mandatory mobilization, and in fact, more youth from Donetsk and Lugansk tried to escape it, but unfortunately, they were cordoned off and shipped to the front. So far from popular support, they had to use very martial means to get those people to fight. Again, like I'm not speaking for every single person in Donetsk and Lugansk, but I don't think this was a general patriotic fervor there.
Yeah, correct. And to continue with Mr. Morano, I can understand why they're appalled by this after Golodomor, but I don't think this is the main reason for the invasion. That's a fair point. Okay, there was an interesting question. Why do Russian tanks always go boom off with the turret? And somebody answered that ammo stored in the turret and not enough armor on top.
So they have automatic carousel loader, which doesn't allow them to put the same armor separator that we have in Abrams tanks. And as a result, yes, indeed, ammo is very easy to set off.
Joe goes, Russia wanted farms and sea access through Ukraine. Russia has sea access through Crimea that they already took. I think they wanted a land bridge to Crimea. That's reasonable. As far as land for oil pipelines, honestly, I'm not so sure because nobody was refusing Russian oil. And wherever Russia wanted to build a pipeline, everybody was playing ball. I don't think was it really.
Out of all the countries in desperate need for land, perhaps Russia is not the first one.
Yeah, because Nord Stream 2 or whatever got blocked. So Nord Stream 2 got blocked by Trump, and then one of the first things Biden did when he got in office, he greenlit it. So then after Russia attacked Ukraine, the Germans blocked it again. So if they wanted Nord Stream 2, they shouldn't have attacked Ukraine.
But it got blocked as a result of Russian aggression against
Correct,
Ukraine.
yeah.
Not the other way around, so it doesn't make sense to...
So just stepping back from it, the whole business of Russia attacking Ukraine because they wanted the world markets to have more access to their oil is absolute nonsense, because while Russia was not attacking anybody, everybody was happy to get oil and gas from Russia and help them build pipelines and all sort of stuff. I don't think anybody was really fighting that. Okay. All right. Do you foresee a time when Ukraine would become a NATO member? Honestly, no. I mean, I guess it's somewhere in the outskirts of possibility, but I'd be very surprised. I mean, what do you think?
Depends. Again, like the only obstacle here is that the West's irrational fear of Russia. If Russia ceases to be a state that threatens, then actually Ukraine will become a member of NATO.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. The way it's going, I don't see it, but maybe further out. What do you think is the future of Finland, Sweden with this push to join NATO? I think they'll join NATO. I think Eugene, we talked about that earlier. I think Eugene is right. I mean, despite some minor objections from Turkey, NATO will absorb Finland and Sweden, because this current endeavor shows that if you are Russia, if you have a long border with Russia, you want to be a part of NATO, just in case. NATO is fundamentally a defensive alliance, really. I mean, so
it's kind of interesting because both United States pro-Russian voices and Russia itself talked about Finland stance as in opposition to those who join NATO. Well, so much for that.
Yeah. That's kind of interesting. Oh, one of the questions was earlier we didn't address that Mr. Moreno, I think, was saying about the Orange Revolution. Where was it? I'm trying to find it. Okay, there we go. Since we start talking about NATO. Secondly, did NATO and the US not act as aggressors with our 2014 CIA-aided color revolution? No. I'll let Eugene talk about this, but NATO fundamentally is not an offensive alliance. Unless somebody is doing something nasty, NATO can't tell the ass from an elbow. And as far as color revolution, there was a lot of Ukrainians there. It's not like CIA went over there and changed the Ukrainian government.
I don't know if you noticed, CIA is not very good at these things. We don't
Any of
really
these
find.
things. Well, but
Yeah,
if I've watched a lot of Hollywood movies, and according to Hollywood movies, CIA can do anything.
Again, this is very much what Russia does. When as soon as somebody on the West or Western nonprofit says that we're helping in Ukraine, answer is okay. See, we told you the West was behind it. Again, like I wish I believed that CIA was the mastermind behind everything that's happening in the world. Unfortunately, it's also a branch of U.S. government with everything that's I think makes U.S. government less effective. So. Yeah, I don't see it.
Yeah, it's. I think it is greatly overblown. But once again, when I was growing up in the Soviet Union, everything was always CIA's fault. You know, as far as the Soviet government was concerned, there was a CIA agent hiding behind every corner, you know, conniving against the great Russian motherland, all sorts of other stuff. That's kind of interesting. You think the higher gas prices are because of the war? Partly, yeah. Oil prices are up, so gas prices are up. To the largest degree, the higher gas prices are primarily driven by the fact that our president is a moron and we should have had a Keystone pipeline. And you know, we could do it could have been alleviated, but the war like this with a major oil and gas producer will obviously have an effect on oil prices. I mean, I don't think it's that complex, really. You're in California. You're paying $8 per gallon, right?
Not 8, but a 7, yes.
Okay.
$6.99, yes.
So who do you blame?
Well, prices were obviously going up before the war, so
Yeah.
the preconditions were there. There is no question that war made it worse. So I think that's probably both make sense to me.
Okay. All right. So are we in agreement that our president is a moron? Yeah, not surprising. All right. Moving on. Do you think China will invade Taiwan in the near future and give cover to Russia to be more aggressive? No. Russia doesn't need cover to be more aggressive, and China does not have the capability to take over Taiwan. I mean, not at the moment. They'll make a lot of noise. They can't take it over. You think Russian troops are inefficient and tactically unsound? You should try the Chinese. When's the last war the Chinese modern military was in?
I don't know. With the countries that like China, I have no idea how well prepared they are. I honestly do not know how to evaluate this. Russia fights wars periodically, and even then, most people kind of assume that they're significantly more formidable as an opponent than they are. With China, I could see it kind of either way. So, on one hand, China does not have conscription; it's professional military. And for a large country like this, it's more feasible to maintain fairly well-trained military, fairly well-equipped military. Its size much smaller proportionally than the size of Russian military. Yeah, I
fair point.
generally don't believe in militaries that don't fight wars. I think that kind of Europe is a good example where there's a lot of good militaries on parades, but very few actually perform in combat. But I do not know how to assess this.
Yeah, well, I mean, a good example was U.S. military when we went into Afghanistan and Iraq. Look at how the doctrine, how everything changed after just a couple of years there.
Yep.
The U.S. military today is a far cry from what it was in 2002. So, Turkey is not a really good NATO ally. Maybe it's all questionable. Turkey is in kind of an interesting spot. where they're a very valuable ally. Whether a good one, I'm not sure how to evaluate that.
We need to define what good ally is. Like, is France a good ally?
Depends if you are interested in French wine and cheese and good food, and yeah.
From the military standpoint, is
No.
this a reliable ally? So, anyways, I will have the same question about many militaries in Europe, whether they contributing or basically just happy to be guaranteed some security.
Yeah, I don't know. Really don't know. Okay, going back to the Orange Revolution, Obama and Victoria Nuland bragged about it openly. Yes, and everything that Obama said was always true, without a doubt, right?
No, sorry, please.
Orange Revolution.
No, I know, but no, this quote does not exist. Please send us a link.
Okay, that's a fair point. But even if they bragged about it, it doesn't mean shit.
I mean, again, like bragging about what? So my claim is there was no version of the phrase with my under my guidance, CIA instigated the Orange Revolution. Nothing of that sort ever existed. So.
That's a fair point. Will Putin take Odessa? I'll go with a no. What do you think?
It doesn't look like it. This would be a pretty significant change in kind of current state of the both border and significant change in Russian offensive capabilities. Initially, people were concerned about Odessa because of the naval assault, but now basically nobody believes Russia is capable of mounting a naval assault.
Ever since that warship of theirs was promoted to being a submarine, right? What was it? Moskva? Yeah.
Yeah, they had initially they had few naval infantry, marine vessels off the shore of Odessa, and expectation was there's going to be imminent amphibious assault. After 2 weeks, one of them also got hit with a missile. Basically, they realized that this was a non-starter.
Pretty much.
Assaulting enemy shores if you cannot assault enemy villages. Unlikely.
Yeah, that's going back to the question about Taiwan. Taiwan is a very populated island, and you would have to have some major amphibious assault, and to pull that off, I mean, I don't think China is capable of that. Can China bomb Taiwan into oblivion? Yes. Can China take over Taiwan? I'm not so sure. Joe, my mom worked on secret projects for the NRO, spying on USSR. So that's who was spying on me in the 80s. Okay, good to know. And going back to oil prices, Biden cut land leases and our domestic production is down 25% because of. I don't know if it's 25%. I haven't checked, but it is down. And our esteemed president has a lot to answer for. Double-digit gas prices, and I see bad economics coming. We're kind of sitting in a stagflation of sorts. The big question is that how long is this going to last? In terms of fundamental economic indicators, I mean, we should get through this, but I really don't know. Double-digit gas prices in California are definitely possible. Not that I'm pointing out that Eugene is living in the wrong state, but I would not do that, would I? China's equipment is very much shit. Only the good stuff is in the parade. Yeah, that's pretty common for totalitarian regimes. China has how many people are in Chinese military? Like 3 or 4 million, something like that, something ridiculous, right?
I mean, I know it's not actually that big given the size of the country.
I remember but doesn't matter if you have 3 or 4 million. You all of your equipment can't be top notch. They haven't had new equipment that long, and even if it's new, I mean, it's not tested, it's not proven out.
So it's 2 million active soldiers. So it's very much comparable to US, even though population is 4.5 times.
US has 2 million active soldiers.
Yeah, probably between all of the branches, something like this.
Oh, I thought it was quite a bit less than that. I thought we were under mil. Maybe I'm wrong.
Could be off as well. Sorry, yes, I am off. That's right, 500,000.
500,000, yeah, that's more like it. So more in China, their fifth gen fighter is trash. Yes, but most importantly, the avionics and the sensor systems are trash. And that with a modern high-tech warfare, it doesn't matter how wonderful your plane is mechanically, if your avionics and the sensor systems are not up to snuff, you're done. And that's very much the case with China. Not that they're not trying to change it, they are. Okay. Well, that's a good question. If Finland and Sweden join NATO and Ukraine, you don't think more desperate measures will be used, perhaps nuclear weapons? No, I think Putin. Honestly, I think Putin is bluffing. But on top of it, what's your solution to this? Every time Russians start threatening nukes, we just fold. I mean, how's this going to work? So let's say Putin runs into opposition Ukraine, Finland joins NATO, Putin goes, okay, we're going to nuke, and immediately everybody folds. So he takes Ukraine. So what's going to be next? He's going to move into Poland and say, if you'd say something, we're going to nuke you. I mean, where do you see this going, right?
I mean, Putin made a statement saying that it's not a geopolitical concern nearly to the same degree as Ukraine is, and I think they cut off power to a couple of villages in Finland along the border with Russia. So I think that would be probably the extent of measures.
Okay. The US steered politics in Ukraine by choosing leaders and holding money over their heads. They outbid the Russians and started this tug of war. Okay, so US did not start this tug of war. The tug of war was happening for a long time. And how is, even if this is true, which is very questionable, even if this is true, why is this bad for US to hold money over the heads of Ukrainian leaders, and it's not bad for Russia to hold money or whatever leverage they have over the heads of Ukrainian leaders? Why is it preferable to you if Ukraine is a Russian satellite than if it is an independent country or even a US client state, which it is not, but fine. Like, I don't understand this argument where we should just not have allies, or we should not have influence anywhere. We should just turn it over to Russians. What the fuck?
Yeah, look, I view it as a completely legitimate means of diplomacy to provide financial aid to the countries that you would like to have closer connection with. Russia does what China does, that US should do it more, if anything.
Yeah. I mean, it once again, but this is an interesting argument I keep hearing from the right. It's, oh, US started it. We should just leave everything alone. What? So just let Russia take over Europe piece by piece? I mean, I don't get this. Okay. Tommy Kennedy, will Ukraine still have an army in a month? Yes, it will. So that's not changing. Oh, that's interesting. Did the French not help with their anti-ship missiles and possibly boots on the ground to man those systems? You know anything about the French doing anything useful?
Look, it's completely possible I missed some dramatic shipment by France. The two missiles that we know were deployed against Russian ships were Ukrainian made. So it's possible that they supply some missiles. Again, I think that the pattern that I believe we're going to see, Ukraine will get anything other than the weapons they actually need to change the situation on the ground. So anti-ship missiles, though useful, do not change anything on the ground, because it's not there is no significant chance of naval warfare taking place. Ships do play some supporting role in the Russian operations, but removing them is pretty difficult, and it's not clear that more missiles is the recipe to anything.
Okay. All right. George Soros bragged about how he went into Ukraine after the collapse of the Soviet Union and exploited the vacuum of power Okay, so everybody exploited the vacuum of power after the collapse of Soviet Union, Putin being most prominent of them.
Sorry, and again, like just let's translate it to less polemical terms. Some organizations that he funded went into Ukraine to provide charity to the causes that they wanted to provide money to, right? Is that the case, or we're implying something very different in character? So if that's the case, then is
I
that
mean,
really
Soros is a world-class asshole, but he's gave a lot of money to Eastern Europe after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Actually, did some good things. Strangely enough,
Soros donates money to many organizations.
correct.
Like the question is, are we talking about disagreement in terms of his vision politically, or he did something strictly illegal?
Uh, After the collapse of Soviet Union, it was very hard to define what was legal and what was illegal. Really, I mean,
He would be not the first person to dig to find the illegality. Let's put it this way.
so okay. So there are a couple of interesting questions here. Oh, there. Oh, that's okay. So forgive me for saying this. That's the stupidest argument of them all. First of all, it assumes equivalency between Mexico and Ukraine, which you can't assume. Then it assumes equivalency between Russia and United States, which I think is morally wrong. And either way, we are fighting with China for influence in a large variety of Latin American countries, to some degree with China as well. So I'm not sure what's your point here. I mean,
And again, we should agree on the definition of satellite.
yeah.
The claim is that U.S. appoints the president in Ukraine, or we support certain political moves by Ukraine the same way how we support certain political moves by France, Germany, Italy, Spain, England, etc.
Yeah. I don't know. I think this is just, that's just a silly argument. Yes, NATO is a bunch of pussies. That's correct. Always have been. Oh, that's interesting. Zelensky has admitted that he is losing 100 Ukrainian soldiers a day, with the real number probably being much higher. How long before Zelensky runs out of trigger pullers? I don't know. About the same time as Russia does.
So I don't recall the statement of 100 soldiers today. It's again possible that I missed something. Officially, Ukraine does not provide casualty numbers on the Ukrainian side. Number itself doesn't sound outrageous. That would put current casualties at 9,000. Uh,
Mhm.
that's possible. Russian casualties there are definitely a few sources that provide estimates. Russia does not. For the last month and a half, they did not provide any estimates for their casualties. Ukraine puts it on 29,000, which, if we're talking about casualties, I find it believable. If we're talking about killed in action, then that sounds a bit high. That would
Mhm.
mean that majority of Russian forces is incapacitated at this point.
Okay. That's a fair point. Okay, that's an interesting question by Mr. Audiozak. Thank you for the donation. If some parts of Ukraine want to go with Russia, why not let those regions do so? I can see fighting for the parts that don't, however. Well, that's one of the things here that's fairly murky. That was part of the big argument we had earlier. Mr. Moreno was saying that Ukrainians want to be Russians, and Eugene and I making a point that we're not seeing it. Is there some sliver of Eastern Ukrainians who want to be Russians? Possibly. And at some point, it's going to sort of shake itself out. But the vast majority of Ukraine quite clearly does not want to be Russians. And that's the where the war is happening. That's what they're fighting for.
I mean, look, it's a generally a difficult question on what granularity can somebody declare self-determination. Can my house decide that I'm not part of California and part of the United States? Most people would agree that's not the case. The question is then who can? So most of the time it's pretty challenging to declare independence, and most of the time you have fairly long and robust separatist movements leading to such political separation. In fact, I don't recall. I mean, maybe Basques in Spain would be.
Well, Basques and Catalonians, right? In
Yeah,
Spain, they've been trying to separate for a long time. I
right.
mean,
I like, again, number one, it's not clear that it has happened because Girkin came to Donetsk, not Donetsk asked Girkin to come. All right. So this is the FSB colonel who started the wave of pro-Russian moves in Donetsk, Lugansk. Very quickly, they were joined by Russian formal military. So again, it's not clear to what degree there was a popular uprising at the very early stages. So one, I do not know if indeed there is anything to talk about, that there is actual parts of Ukraine feeling strongly pro-Russian. Number two, even if there are such portions, historically, this typically has not been an easy path to just join another country.
Mm-hmm. That's a very fair point. Okay, I'll skip a couple of comments and I'll go back to them in a moment. Mr. Morano is continuing this argument. I'm just advocating to not undermine our enemies on their borders and expect it will not backfire. Okay. We were not undermining our enemies at their borders. We were supporting a potentially friendly country. That's the second largest country in Europe. Ukraine is not Russia's border. This is the fundamental Russian argument. They're saying Ukraine is basically us and we're just reunifying and denazifying in the process and all that sort of other nonsense. I don't think that works that way, honestly.
Yeah, so look, again, like, either you believe that countries have a right of self-determination or they do not. So I do not buy sphere of influence argument where we arbitrarily decide which countries belong to which sphere, and at this point, the country loses its right to self-determination.
Yeah, that's like I said. I think that's a preposterous argument. Oh, there we go. I would argue that the U.S. European governments are losing its moral superiority, becoming less distinguishable from China or Russia. I think that's complete nonsense.
Well,
I'd like to see that argument. I don't think it holds water.
It depends. I think that kind of our fiscal policy is not prudent. If you mean by that, yes, I agree. So there are definitely some policy statements that I would made in US that I would disagree with. That said, I do not find. Yeah. Anyway, so again, like, we're talking about some specific changes that both of us find distasteful, possibly. Do I still equate US with Russia in terms of kind of regime and level of control? No.
Okay, Mr. Second Guess Always. Certainly, there is a far right section in Ukraine. There's also an even bigger issue in Russia. Look at the Wagner Battalion, Russia's battalion, Imperial Russian. Look, there's no shortage of assholes all over former Soviet Union.
So Wagner is not.
They're just mercenaries. Wagner.
No, they're not mercenaries. They're literally a branch of Russian Secret Service. I literally do not believe they do any independent
really?
action. Yeah.
I thought they were just mercenaries. No.
No, that's an official story. But if you look at where they participate, they for some reason fought to defend the Russian interest in Syria. Like, I do not believe that they got lavishly paid for that by Syria, but I do think they work in Africa in several countries to install pro-Russian governments. Anyways, and I forgot the name of the Russian billionaire that's owner of Wagner battalion. He's a very close associate of Putin, and basically expectation is that this is plausible deniability play, where those are not really our people, but kind of they just do exactly what we want.
Okay, it's reasonable. All right, Mr. Andrew is late. So how do we reiterate the current status of war in Ukraine in 3 sentences or less?
It shifted from very cavalier, very risky moves by Russia to much smaller objectives, but no less fierce fighting in the east of Ukraine.
Okay. All right, let's go with that. Oh, this is actually a nice bird's eye view question for you. What is America's motive for supporting Ukraine to this degree? Ukraine has little strategic value to us compared to Taiwan, which is much more valuable, sadly. So does Ukraine has very little strategic value for us?
Well, I think that both answered by the same support. So by supporting Ukraine, we're demonstrating that we have a will to support someone's independence against somebody, and I'm sure China is watching it very closely. It is true that Ukraine is not a source of semiconductors for most of our industries. It's mainly grain in terms of their main exports, but destabilizing Europe have significant implications, including if it becomes a NATO
Correct.
conflict. Anyways, so we're hedging our bet. Well, one, there is a moral question of who do you support. Two, we do not want to formally be required to provide support to NATO state being attacked. And
Mhm.
also, this shows us fairly on the cheap that we're still willing to provide support, which deters China. So, in my
Correct.
mind, those are the reasons.
And there's also a little bit of a practical or moral question, depending on how you phrase it. Do you want to live in a Pax Americana, the world where, in the unipolar world where America is a dominant economic and political power, or do you want to absolve that responsibility and live in a multipolar world where Russia, China, or some other authoritarian regimes are on equal footing with America, extending the same influence? Sort of an important question. I'll be honest with you. If we think we can retreat behind our oceans and everybody's going to leave us alone, that's a standard isolationist argument. I don't think it holds water.
I mean,
But
we tried it twice
it
and it
didn't work.
went.
Didn't work before. Won't work now. It's much smaller world than it used to be. Okay, that's an interesting one. So we're at a couple hours, so we'll go through the remaining questions and wrap up. Are there still mass protests in Russia?
No. So initially there was a wave of protests in most major cities. They were not huge in number. There were not hundreds of thousands of people, but given very likely penalties, including jail, etc., they were still formidable. Right now, they're typically fairly isolated. So there are groups of, well, first of all, it's completely illegal at this point to have those
Mm-hmm.
protests. So going to the protest, you know you're being arrested or at least being summoned to court. So risk is very obvious. There are still actions happening here and there.
Okay, so not too much anymore. Oh, this is interesting. Is it true that Putin is only attacking with 10% of his military?
No. So estimates are around, well, okay. So there are a few ways to judge size of the military. There is actual combat ready units, right? And then there is entire units, which, while people wearing military uniform, they do not have the right occupation. They do not necessarily have meaningful training. And then there
Mm-hmm.
is a typical way of counting when you count anybody who went through any kind of service in Russia as a potentially reserve corps. So if we're talking about actual combat capable units, I
Mm-hmm.
think all of the armies except for one took part in this conflict. So I believe it's 12 to 1. So overwhelming majority has taken part. In terms of actual capabilities, probably close to 70% are directly in the theater.
Interesting. Okay, I mean that sounds about right. I will say this. So this is another thing I hear on the alt-right media all the time, claiming that Putin is just playing 4D chess and everything is going to plan. This is the thing that I hear there all the time. That Russia Putin only deployed 10% of his forces. And any moment now he's going to overwhelm the moon and all that. That's a
Well,
little bit off the wall. Was
it,
Cuba free to choose? Not sure what Cuba was choosing. But if we really wanted Cuba militarily, we could have taken Cuba anytime. The fact that we haven't, well, really doesn't speak that well of us. Cuba had a communist revolution, all sorts of fun happening there. That's communist revolutions always.
So, I mean, again, like Cuba is a communist nation. So I agree with Ilya. So while there was Bay of Pigs, I don't think this represented massive effort. US was trying to change reality on a cheap using expatriates.
Yeah, like I said, if we really, really wanted to take Cuba militarily, we can. I mean,
yeah.
And Mr. Morano is continuing this argument. Ukraine, by its name, is the border of Russia, and geographically, it is the border to the Russian heartland. I think holding money over the corrupt system to influence it against the interests of Russia, there's another post of Russia, was a dangerous move. Yeah, you can think of Ukraine as Russia's border, or you can think of Ukraine as European border with Russia, right? Why does Russia have a preferential? We just talked about spheres of influence. Why does Russia have a preferential right to influence Ukraine over anybody else? I don't think, once again, I don't think this argument hold water.
Look, I do think that aside from kind of who actually pulled the trigger first, which is supremely relevant, one also need to have some confidence in Western system of governments and some of the principles we stand for. And if this is completely irrelevant, if any dictatorship is equal in your eyes to any democratic country, some of the arguments are more difficult to make.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's right. So, guys, we're at 2 hours, so I want to wrap up. Let me look through the comments and see what else is interesting. Eugene, if you see something interesting, point it out. Oh, real quick thing. Moreno is a rather funny name for a Russian troll. He's not a Russian troll. I don't know the guy. I know he's in the US. I think he's Russian speaking, but I don't think he's a Russian troll. We have an interesting discussion about the domino effect. Mr. MZH says that domino theory died in Vietnam. I don't agree with that. Oh, and this gets interesting. Will a multipolar world, at least the World Economic Forum, is fractured and has less power? I'll be honest with you, I'm much more concerned about Russia and China than the WEF. I don't know. I think we just lost Eugene. All right, I'll give him a moment to reconnect if he wants to. And I'll look through a couple remaining comments. Oh, there he is. You're back.
Yep.
Let's see. Okay, this is interesting. Nations will attempt to self-determination, but the government supported by its people has the right for self-determination. The right is only paid for in blood, cunning, and weapons. Something that does not get that much mileage, not enough mileage, I think, is that all these countries that came out of the collapse of Soviet Union, they may be old countries, but they are new governments, new government systems, new political systems. They have been around since early 90s. It'll really take them time to figure out how their governments, how to give some sort of a continuity to their governments, honestly. A lot of the process we're seeing right now is a process of really hashing all that stuff out. So one of my lights just died, so now I look like Volant with one side of my face dark. Let's see. Mr. Audizak, thanks for answering the question. Perhaps the world would benefit from a formal process for independence movements that could create new states or join different countries. The Basques, I think, certainly. So formal process for independence movements is not possible. A formal process would involve some sort of a functional international governing body that would establish this formal process, right? And there is no such thing as a functioning international governing body. United Nations is just a bad joke, always has been. It's openly so now. I don't know. I don't see how that's possible, so this is always going to be a complicated question. Oh, this one is interesting. Will Ukraine eventually become willing to let go of eastern Ukrainian parts of the country to end fighting for now, or more likely to continue this fight for years? So Eugene's argument, and I'll let him address this, I'll just try to summarize, is that eventually the West is going to force Ukraine to do exactly that, because nobody seems to be supporting Ukraine in earnest, and we are all trying to figure out if Eugene is wrong on this one. Hopefully he is.
I would like to be wrong on this one. This is not a preferred answer. Again, I just want to make sure that when we're saying let go, we're not talking about letting people exercise the will, but rather bending to the will of Putin, right?
Okay, here's the continuation to the Cuba question. Was Cuba free to host Russian military? Have almost destroyed the world over it. Well, Russia wanted to put nukes in Cuba, and nobody enjoyed that. And we're not exactly putting nukes in Ukraine either, if that's your concern.
You're right. I think that's an important distinction. So nukes were not put in Cuba for the sake of Cuba. They were put there to threaten the United States. There was no similar action with respect to Ukraine. There were no missile batteries. There were no U.S. forces amassed or NATO forces amassed in Ukraine. Yeah, so that's where comparison dies. Yes, if we made Ukraine a nuclear power in spite of Russia, then it would be a question why we're doing this. We did no such thing.
Yeah. So this comes back to this argument that where Russian propaganda has been spectacularly successful, even based on this argument of trying to frame NATO as an offensive force trying to destroy Russia. NATO does not try to destroy Russia. NATO is a very marginally functional defensive alliance, right? NATO has never attacked Russia. It's never tried to attack Russia. Never even tried to set up to attack Russia. Partly because in all of their folly, they understand how difficult it is to do anything with this country the size of Russia. Partly because there was never any will or interest in it. It truly is a fundamental defensive alliance against Soviet Union or now Russia, which is more or less the same thing. I don't know if you want to comment on that. You're welcome to. This one is just a historical illiteracy. Kiev is the historic birthplace of Russia. No. Kiev was the first Russian state. The modern Russian state is Kiev is not the birthplace of the modern Russian state. I had a live cast on that on my local channel about a month and a half ago. A little bit of the historical perspective. I'm not going to rehash it here. If you're Russian speaking, Boris Akunin has this nice 10-volume thing on the history of the Russian government, not Russian country, Russian government. It's probably the best readable resource I've seen on the subject. It goes over that in significant detail.
In general, let's say the statement that stands is accurate. So what? And British royal dynasty came from France. Does it mean we can?
Well, or Germany, depending on which line you're looking at. Right?
Exactly. So what? We're talking about events over millennia ago. Is this how we judge history?
So let's see what else. Okay, this is a good one. So Megagoch, Douglas Murray made good comments about the right wrongly worshiping Putin as some kind of a savior of the West. So not all of the right? So the alt-right or the very extreme parts of the right. But the argument there is very interesting, right? They hate the left, and they see Putin as the enemy of the left, and they're assuming that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and I think that's completely wrong.
Just to highlight, we're hosting a conservative event in Budapest right now, which is kind of continuation of the same line of thinking that Orban must be great because everybody in the West hates him.
Yeah, it's not a two-side only argument. I think there is more subtlety on that. Okay, and Mr. Morano goes, I don't worship Putin at all, nor am I a member of the alt-right. I'm just trying to make reasonable arguments to understand the nature of the conflict and promote peaceful solutions. So stepping back from this for a moment, just to be clear, I appreciate your input. I just happen to disagree with you, right? I don't know who you are. I don't know if you're alt-right or not. Your arguments sound a little bit similar to that, but once again, I think there is a lot of granularity for it, and I just happen to disagree with you.
Not making a personal statement, but I have to say alt-right and alt-left arguments overlap in some cases.
Significantly.
Right, when we're talking about being provoked, etc., you hear that from extreme left as well. They definitely differ in some aspects, but yeah, again, like some of the arguments, if you just think about it, do not make sense. Like if Kiev is capital of ancient Russia, then Kiev should take over Russia, right? Or like, is it like
so? That was actually the last argument from Mr. Rodizakov. There goes. Kiev is a historic birthplace of the Russian state. Sounds like a reason for Putin to abdicate to Zelensky. Yeah, I'll reiterate this at a later point, guys, if you want. I think there is a historical lesson here that needs to be repeated. Kiev is not a birthplace of the Russian state. Kiev is a birthplace of the first Eastern Slavic state. The modern Russian state was born in Moscow under the Mongol occupation. It's a very, very different thing. So, let's see what else. Okay, Putin is a bad dude. Zelensky is no angel. Both geopolitical opponents. I'm about America first and staying out of unnecessary engagements. 40 billion to another country while we're fucked here. Okay, that's also worth mentioning. So by military standards, military aid standards, 40 billion is pocket change. Doesn't make jack shit to what we do here. It sounds like a big number because for you and I, it's a big number. For the government the size of the American, 40 billion is pocket change.
Well, compared to 7 trillion we spent during COVID stimulus, it's definitely a very small number. Again, like I would ask about both geopolitical opponents. Do not think it's true in the same way how I probably can find political opponents in the US that get punished. This is not comparable to Putin's regime, and similarly, I cannot think of political opponents who got jailed for political opposition really in Ukraine, but even if it's true, not to the same scale.
Not to the same scale, but I agree that neither one is an angel. And once again, if I thought this could be isolated,
Look, to me, the statement is similar to neither Hitler or Churchill are angels. Like, yes, yet I find one admirable, another one not.
Well, I don't think Zelensky is quite Churchill, but I definitely have more sympathy for Zelensky than for Putin. That's for sure. Okay. So, all right. It's been 2 hours and 15 minutes. I originally budgeted 2 hours for this. Let me look through the comments. We'll do one more, and then we'll wrap things up. Okay, this one has something to do with Ukraine. Within reason, how much longer does anyone think Putin will remain in power? That's actually a good one to wrap this up with. You want to take this one?
Sure. I do find credible the rumors that he has cancer. Typical cancer patient has life expectancy less than 5 years. I will put my bound there.
Okay, it's a fair point. I'll say is that it's possible, but the bottom line is that we have no clue. We just don't know. What's happening there at the top of the Russian governments are opaque. Oh, and apparently, I think we are the 2 Ukrainian cheerleading clowns. I think that's a first. I don't know if it's a promotion or demotion, but
it's ironic since neither one of us comes from Ukraine. But
yeah, we both grew up in Russia for what it's worth, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a fun thing. So I'll wrap this up. I'll remind you guys a story of a buddy of mine. Eugene knows him. So he grew up in Kiev, right? And we've been friends. We went to high school together. We've been friends for many years, and we've always had this argument. I despise Russians more than Ukrainians, and he, because he grew up in Ukraine, you know who I'm talking about, despises Ukrainians more than Russians. So it's something to do with growing up in a place, so you know the people there and you dislike them more. I never pretended to be an unbiased observer. I grew up in Russia. I have no love for it in any way, shape, or form. But you don't have to be a completely unbiased observer to observe that Russia attacked Ukraine, not the other way around.
I don't know. I would claim more of a neutrality. I don't have any. I do
Yeah,
not have.
yes, you're probably more neutral than I am.
Yeah. Similarly, kind of. I never thought of myself as substantially pro-Ukrainian, literally up until this conflict. Right.
Exactly.
Objectively, Putin has become more dictatorial, and his foreign policy became more unhinged throughout the years. So that changed my opinion. Other than that, I don't really harbor strong feelings against Russia as a culture, Russia as a territory, just the current government.
Yeah, I take it a little bit beyond that, but once again, it's you don't. It doesn't take much to observe who started this one, right? It's not. This one is not arguable. We keep on thinking, oh, if Ukrainians would just go along, why do they have to go along? I will wrap this up on a simple thing, really. The vast majority of Ukrainians are clearly showing by their behavior that they don't want to be Russians. And we cannot just ignore that. All this talk about we did this or we did that or we prompted sort of a government, all of those arguments have been put to rest by the simple fact that when Ukraine was attacked by Russia, the vast majority of the Ukrainian population rose up and essentially proclaimed that they do not want to be Russians. At the core of it, I think it is as simple as that. Right, gentlemen. Eugene, stick around for a sec. Uh, I will leave you guys with this. Thank you all for sticking with us for more than 2 hours with power outages and all the interruptions. I do appreciate it. Next live cast I do will go back to guns and optics. If you guys have a specific topic you want me to cover, please say so in the comments. I have a couple of ideas. I will post them up on my website, darklordofoptics.com, and I'll give you a few options. You guys choose, and I'm probably gonna go nerdy on something, but if there is something specific you want, let me know. Y'all have a good night.